Hey, this is Mr. V over here doing a book review today for In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. This is a non-fictional book by Truman Capote. The main premise for this book is on November 15th, 1959, in a small town in Holcomb, Kansas, 4 members of the Clutter family were savagely murdered by a blast from a shotgun held a few inches from their face. There was no apparent motive for the crime, and there was almost no clues. As Truman Capote reconstructs the murder and investigation that led to the capture, trial, and execution of the killers, he generates both a mesmerizing suspense and astonishing empathy. So, you can see that is the premise for In Cold Blood. Before you want to consider reading this book, one thing I recommend is that you are over the age of 18. You already heard the premise for it. It involves 4 murders, and it even says savagely murdered. So I would say you want to be over the age of 18, but you also want to be able to deal with this type of topic. As it's not an easy topic, as it's murder, and this is nonfiction. So this is the real life stuff, and it deals with the real ones. And he reconstructs what happened in depth. So it is pretty tough at times. So that's why I say you want to also be able to enjoy it in that fashion, because when you're reading this and he's reconstructing it, you sometimes get this, like, you can feel the coldness of what happened. And that's why you want to make sure you can handle it. But for those who can handle it, this is a great book. And this is a very interesting book. There's many things I liked about this book. You can tell how much research Truman Capote did for this book, because he gives the background to, like, all the characters, to the 4 family members who were killed. And you already heard in the description, they did catch the murderers. And so he talks about also the 2 murderers, who are these 2 treasure hunting con men type. And he gives you the background of them. And he even talks about, like, the other minor characters, like their friends and the neighbors and other people they run into. So you really can tell the amount of work he does. And he even, by the chapters, he goes back and forth between the characters, and he makes it flow very easily when you learn about everyone leading up to the murders. And you get a pretty good sense of this whole town leading up to the murders and after the murders, while they're investigating it and what is going on. But despite all these things, I said he's introducing all these characters, giving you backgrounds to everyone, it is surprisingly easy to follow. And it's surprisingly easy to follow considering there are a lot of people in this book, but there's just a few main ones. So that is really good. But he definitely goes very in depth with the murders, and you get to see, like, he gives the discussions, like, what the detectives find, because there were basically no clues from this murder. Like, these people were murdered. There was no clues, no motive. It didn't seem like they had no idea why this happened. Yet it was such a gruesome crime. This whole family was murdered. 4 people were murdered in a gruesome fashion. And again, he goes in depth about how they were murdered in there. And you wonder what happened. And as the title says, just in cold blood, but there's a little more to it. But it's like, you get to hear, like, what the detectives' theories were. And they had many theories, and it's very interesting, because you wonder what happened, and you are basically going, like, into the detective's mind, because they are trying to solve an unusual case. 4 murders, no motive, no clues, and they, like, say, like, what and why things could have happened. And then they pick up more clues or what happens, and they're questioning people. And it's just super interesting, because as I said, you are basically going into the mind of the detective. So that was a lot of fun. And while you're doing this, it is very intense and exciting. It is an intense book, because you continue to wonder what happened fully and why did this happen. And it's somewhat creepy too, because this is a small town where everyone knows each other, and then it was like this whole family just gets killed and there's no motive, and it could have been anyone in the town, and they start to, like, kind of question each other and, like, who did what. It's almost like that typical, like, horror story, but it is real. So that's what makes it very intense and exciting. It's also the way he wrote it, which I'll discuss more in just a little bit. But as I also say, you need to be able to deal with darkness, because it is 4 brutal murders. and you are following different these con men, and they're continuing to con people out of money, and you learn more and more, and you learn what the detectives learn, and it's pretty brutal. So you want to make sure that you can deal with all of that. Now, some of the things I did not like about this book, there's a few things. One thing was that each chapter was super long. And I wouldn't even call it chapters. He basically just broke it down into 4 sections. This whole book was just broken into 4 sections, and it's basically each section is about 1/4. And in each section, there was like a break in the paragraphs, which is supposed to technically be the next chapter, because that's when he would switch like to what was happening to someone else, or you learn some new clue they picked up. But you could see like it is just 4 sections, and I did not like that. I prefer there to be actual like complete new page for a chapter. That's just a preference, because I like knowing when a section is complete and it just starts a whole new section. Like, that's just me personally. I think you could have broken it down into like 25 different chapters instead of just those 4 sections. So that was one thing I didn't like about the book. Another thing I didn't like about the book was that I felt some parts were a little unnecessary. Not in terms of the gruesome factor, but in terms of it took a little bit of time to get going at the start of the book, because he did want to tell you who these people were, but I felt there were some unnecessary sections, like 2 of the con men he was following. You know, they went to Mexico at one point, and they kind of did this humongous side tour, which almost gave you like nothing, because you already knew there were these con men, you already knew how weird they were, and I just felt some of the stories he told of them were completely unnecessary. And maybe he could have told you a little bit, but I just felt it was longer than needed. So, you know, those were just some of the things I did not like about the book. Now, as for his writing style, I felt this was amazingly written. Like, this was amazing, the way he wrote this, you know, because it is a very dark book, but he just did such a great job writing it, because he describes the situations so well. Because he will sometimes give you what it looks like, he gives you dialogue, and then you can just picture it. You can just visualize it. It was just so easy to picture the scenery. Yet he was doing all this while keeping a very tense feeling while you're reading it. And it was very tense while doing it. But while he's doing all this stuff, it's still very easy to follow. And that's what made it so great. He was not only giving different backgrounds for different characters, but he was giving you dialogue that they had with different townsmen, and then you could just visualize a town, and he just did such an amazing job writing it, yet he kept you on the edge of your seat. You didn't feel like it was boring. It almost felt like a fictional book at times, you know, because he would switch between people. He'd switch between the investigators, between the townspeople, between the murders, and he was doing all this stuff. So it felt almost like a fictional book, but this was real. And that's why he just did such an amazing job writing it. And this whole book it was a great book, because you get a true account of what happened. You get a true account of who they were, who the family was, who the town people were, who the murderers were, the investigation, the trial, the post-trial. You get a true investigation of everything. And that's why I felt this was just an amazing, amazing book. And if you can handle the subject, I highly recommend you guys go out and read In Cold Blood, because it was just a fascinating read. If you guys have any questions or comments, please post it in the comment section below, because I love to hear your opinions on different books. If you guys want to see more reviews like the one you just saw, please hit the subscribe button, as I always upload multiple different types of book reviews. But thank you for watching my book review today. This is Mr. V. Go enjoy reading.